A very good evening to all of you here in London and all of you around the world who are watching right now. I'm Manisha Tank from CNN in London, and it's great to have you with us. Welcome to the second event in our new series of Google Plus versus debates. It's all organised by Intelligence Squared. Now tonight we're debating the family, something very close to all of our hearts, I'm sure. The motion that's up for debate tonight. The traditional nuclear family has had its day. Gay parents, single parents, communes, anything goes. Children need to grow up in a loving environment, say the Liberals, but love isn't something that's restricted to that which exists between a married man and a woman. It comes more and more frequently in all sorts of different guises and combinations. Now, the traditionalists, they might step in and say, this is just libertarian claptrap. We don't want to hear this. The most depressing thing to come out of the sexual revolution of the 1960s is the utter selfishness of parents. Children need the stability, they might say, of the nuclear family in order to flourish and develop a sense of duty and trust, the very underpinnings of a well-structured society. So, to debate these issues tonight, we have invited three esteemed speakers. I'm really happy to have you here, guys. To our base here in Sadler's Wells in London. We were meant to have with us Philip Blond, but he couldn't make it. An unfortunate gym accident. I hear that he's perfectly fine, but he couldn't make it. He even made it to the hospital today to join us. So we will be having somebody step in his place. But these experts will be joining us also via Google and the Hangouts, and you can see on the screens around the room their contribution tonight. Now, your vote is very crucial to all of this, and it doesn't really work without it in these Intelligence Squared debates. We've already asked you to vote either in person in the audience or online, and in a short while we're going to be announcing the result of that vote. I'm really looking forward to that. But at the end of the debate, you're also going to have a second chance. You never know. Some of our speakers may have turned you one way or the other, and if they have, you get the chance to vote again and let us know about it. For those of you who are here in London, there is going to be a ballot box that's going to go around, and you'll see that some 10 minutes or so before the end of this debate to have another go. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome our first speaker for the motion. The traditional nuclear family has had its day. May I welcome Philippa Perry.
The traditional nuclear family has had its day. In the 1970s, 90% of us, if we were born then, would probably be born to heterosexual married couples. At least, I think they were heterosexual anyway. Anyway, now, nearer 50% is the figure for people born to heterosexual married couples. And it's time, really, that we caught up with this change. In France, they're having a lot of difficulty at the moment catching up with this. The majority over there are against gay marriage, for example. They want to carry on with their traditional way of doing things. One man, his wife, and several secret mistresses. Yes, culture does take time to adapt. I mean, I take time to adapt. If you say the word family to me, what immediately comes into my mind is a sort of gorgeous-looking silver fox male model, his yummy mummy blonde wife, their two adorable children on bikes with stabilizers. I sort of think of a sort of Centre Parks advert, really. But it's time for me to move my ideas on, because family means a lot more than that, and we are doing other families a great disservice if we can only think of that nuclear family. They come in different forms these days: singles, couples, without children, with children, blended families, gay, straight, trans, able-bodied, differently abled. If I've left you out, I apologise, because I don't want to leave anybody out. And when we idealise the nuclear family, that is just what we're doing. We're making people that aren't a part of a nuclear family somehow feel less than. And I don't want to do that anymore. And the other thing is, we're also doing a disservice to those nuclear families, because if we put that variable of a family up on a pedestal, it's got too higher expectations and people can get disappointed in it. It doesn't sort of give happiness by magic. It's not even the safest place to bring up children. The Archives of Sexual Behaviour recently published a study, a longitudinal study of lesbian parents. And they found out that with lesbian parents, 0% of 17-year-old adolescents that were questioned were physically abused. And 0% of the children of lesbian parents were sexually abused. In the control group of heterosexual parents, 26% of adolescents reported physical abuse and 8% sexual abuse. It's not practical to assign all parenting to lesbian parents. I take that. But it's not also practical to assume that all parents should be married heteros. What me and the opposition will probably agree on is what kids need, which is security, safety, care, consideration. They need their feelings soothed, they need their feelings contained at times, and they need their feelings and experiences validated. And they need their adults to make a commitment to them as well. And they also need to have their differences validated, their different experiences understood and validated. The commitment that children need is like 24/7, and gays and lesbians are actually in quite a good position to offer that commitment because they don't actually get pregnant by accident quite so often. And so this gives them a greater motivation to parent well and be involved. Children do need involved parents, and let's not get involved muddled up with indoctrination. Some traditionalists may fear that gay parents try to indoctrinate their children to be homosexual. This is actually not the case. Sexuality doesn't actually even work like that. But gay and lesbian parents are more used to working with difference and allowing difference. So it's not likely to be a problem. And if people are worried that it is a problem, it makes me worry that they're actually projecting their own way of parenting onto gays and lesbians. I mean, do they themselves try to indoctrinate their children to be heterosexual? I don't know. But if we are intolerant of difference, we are actually party to deceit. And deceit goes hand in hand with dysfunction. Difference does not go hand in hand with dysfunction. What a child needs runs far deeper than the sexuality or setup of its parents. Now, single mums come in for quite a hard knock when it comes to doing stats and crime rates and stuff. In fact, they are positively demonized, I think, by certain sections of society. And in the 80s, the rising crime rates were correlated with the rising numbers of single mothers. But actually, if we look at those statistics now, there are more and more single mothers, but the crime rates are levelling off or indeed dropping. So I think it's time to stop demonising single mothers. Thank you. If we're going to put resources into families, and I think we should, let's not put resources into turning the clock back, but let's put resources into education about difference, relationships, and about emotional intelligence, because we need educating about these things. I'm not against traditional families. I think they can work really, really well. I'm against idealising traditional families. And they can work really well, especially if they function like your typical lesbian couple. Thank you. Do I say back?
Yes. I'm just going to send you back to the podium, Philippa, because we're going to bring in Glenn Stanton, who is the Director for Family Formation Studies at Focus on the Family. He also served the George W. Bush administration for many years as a consultant. Now, he's going to challenge some of your arguments.
Oh, dear.
So let's listen in. Glenn, what have you got to say in response to Philippa? And good to see you.
Very interesting points that she makes. I mean, one of the things, and obviously she means this as a very positive statement, but she says, she mentions all these different kinds of families and that she doesn't want to leave anybody out. And the question is, seriously? So there are no family forms that we would say, okay, we need to have fewer of those than more. I think it's interesting. Polygamy. They are very serious people advocating for those kinds of families, but we typically don't hear them mentioned positively in these kinds of circles. I think simply because they're not as hip and cool and trendy as some of these others. You talked about in gay and lesbian homes, typically the lesbian homes, because those are the ones that have been studied, that they don't necessarily produce children that are more likely to identify as lesbians.
Okay,
and the very study.
Glenn, I'm going to jump
Yes.
in there 1 second. I'm really interested in this point that you make about polygamy, and I just wanted to bring you back in, Philippa, to get a response.
Sure.
Your view on that.
Well, my experience of polygamy is restricted to reading colour supplements about it. And the polygamists themselves seem very much for it. I don't know enough about it to judge it. So I'm going to be uncertain about polygamy. Ugh, can't even say it, so I'm obviously not that much for it.
There you go. You can't even say it. I think that says it all. Glenn, let's take it back to you, but I thought it was quite interesting to just address that.
I really am, the jury's out.
Right.
The thing is, I'm sure there are some arrangements like that do work.
Right.
I think we mustn't write off things that work just by generalising. Maybe in many examples it is abusive, I don't know. But maybe sometimes it works. So the jury's out.
Or maybe we need to revisit that one. But Glenn, carry on.
Yeah, and that's my very point is you had stated yourself that you didn't want to leave anybody out, and now, you bring up a particular form, and I think you're rightly so, is like, okay, the jury's out on that. I just wanted to
what I mean by saying the jury's out, it means that I haven't got any stats or figures about it. I am not in a position, apart from my personal opinion, to say whether it works or not. But maybe in some instances it does. Of course, I'm against setups that are abusive. But many setups that aren't the traditional nuclear family are viable and are not abusive and are even working and functional.
Okay, well, we're going to have to finish with the challenges for a second.
Sure.
Don't forget, speakers, through the chair, please. Through the chair.
Oh, sorry.
It's all good. It's all good. But Philippa, thank you very much for that. Do take a seat.
Thank you.
Take a rest. And that was really good stuff. Now, and well-deserved. It's quite something to get up there. And it's your chance now, Anne. I want to bring in Anne Atkins to speak against this motion. Some of you may know Anne. She is a novelist, journalist, broadcaster, and often makes appearances for BBC Radio 4's Thought for the Day. I'd like to bring you up, and since you have to, in a way, step in for our missing guest tonight. You'll get a little bit of extra time, Anne, but please do step up to the podium to join us now to address the motion that is up for debate, a reminder, the traditional nuclear family has had its day. Gay parents, single parents, communes, anything goes. Where do you stand on this motion?
You may have heard, apparently, the Deputy Prime Minister was asked at the weekend, do the Liberal Democrats consider the Conservatives their friends or their brothers? He said, oh, brothers, definitely. You choose your friends. I'm going to start with a rather shocking confession. I'm not that well versed in the rules of debating, but I'm sure this breaks one of the cardinal ones, which is to say that I accepted this engagement back in the summer when it was slightly different format and title, and I didn't really look at it closely until a few weeks ago when I was preparing what to say, and had a sleepless night or two before ringing Intelligence Squared and saying, I don't suppose anyone on the other side would like to swap with me, would they? And I can argue the other way. Now, that was for two reasons. One was a good reason, which is that I suspect we have a lot of overlap, a lot of areas of agreement. Philippa and I met a couple of weeks ago to do a debate for The Guardian, and we agreed on about 80%. I mean, I would agree that love in a family is absolutely crucial, possibly the most important thing. I don't know. But it was also for another reason, which is that I'm a coward. Now, if you took your manuscript, I'm a writer, so I think in terms of writer's analogies, to one publisher who said, oh, this is the best thing I've read this year, it's fantastic, you're going to win the Booker, it's amazing, and then you took it to another publisher who said, it's not actually your best, you're going to have to work on this quite hard for it to be up to the standard of your last book, you know which publisher you would like more. It wouldn't necessarily rest where the truth is. We do like people who bring us nice messages, and I bet most of you who voted before this debate started voted with my opponents, because it's it feels a much nicer way to vote. We want to include everybody, I want to include everybody, and it's not nice to criticise other forms. But what I want to ask you to do tonight is to think with your mind, not your emotions, to judge on the evidence, not on the way you feel at the moment. Just to sort of define terms a minute, nuclear family, when you hear the word nuclear family, you tend to think first off of sort of 1950s model of a husband going out to work, wife with a penny, 2.4 children, maybe a dog, I have no flag to fly for that kind of model, okay? I've never lived in that sort of nuclear family in my life, or at least not since I was about 3. Our household at the moment consists of about 10 of us, I think, including my husband, myself, 2 or 3 grown-up children who come and go. Actually, our eldest is not living at home, but her fiancé is. My 95-year-old father, the one person you might expect who's our 9-year-old, is actually living with another family in France. And we've got Swiss, an Australian, this week a 15-year-old from Palestine. And the last year we've had Malawian, somebody from Pakistan, who said our family was just like his family back in Lahore, where there are 17 of them, apart from the booze and the pork. So, I'm not arguing for the two parents and the 2.4. But you could also define a nuclear family as a family with a nucleus, with a critical nucleus of a couple legally bound to one another in a lifelong exclusive relationship and their biological children. Now, that model goes back to the beginning of, the beginning of recorded human history. That is pretty well universal, with some variations here and there. And that's the model I want you to consider. And what I want the question I want you to ask, this title says anything goes, okay? The question I want you to ask is it really true that anything goes? Is it really true that any family structure is as good as any other? Or is there something about that nucleus, you can add as many people to it as we have in our house, but with that nucleus, is there something about that is different? And I want you to question that based on the evidence, not on your, how you would like it to be. I'm going to be referring to, there is masses of research on this. I mean, masses. If I tell you that I started to write this 8 days ago, the Monday before yesterday, thinking to do it in an afternoon and have the rest of the week to finish a book I'm working on. And in fact, I have spent the whole 8 days reading this research because there is so much of it and it is so compelling. Now, I'm not going to deal with every kind of family structure. I'm not going to deal with polygamy, actually, because there's not much research in the West because we're not that interested in it. I'm not actually going to deal with gay parenting for a similar reason. There simply is not enough reputable data on gay parenting. I mean, I could give you my opinion, but what's the point of that? It's too new, we all know that. It's also too tiny a minority. If I tell you that there are 13.1 dependent children in this country, and only 0.15 of those children are raised in gay parent families, you can see that if we did a study on 10,000 children, which would be a reputable study, only a dozen of them would be raised in gay parent families. So we just don't know how that works. There is some research out there, but most of it is interpreted in very skewed ways. I would like to know, for instance, I'm not accusing you of being skewed, Philippa, for a moment, but the research you were talking about on lesbians, it doesn't surprise me at all, actually, that there's less abuse in a totally women-headed family, not at all. There may be other things different about it. For instance, men tend to encourage risk, as it happens. And I would like to know that, but let's go that. But I would like to know how many families were in that study and how they controlled for socioeconomic background. So the research I'm going to look at this evening, I'm mainly drawing on 3 studies, all of which are drawing on hundreds of peer-reviewed studies with very sophisticated methodology. For instance, longitudinal studies. So you can see, for instance, if we see that married people happen to be healthier, is that because healthier people tend to be more attractive? So they have allowed for that. They have allowed for socioeconomic differences. They have allowed, as I say, this is hundreds. Each one of the 3 papers I'm drawing on has looked at hundreds of examples. One of them is signed by 70 reputable academics from economics, from sociology, from psychology, from psychiatry, from philosophy. So I'm drawing on those 3. I'm not going to footnote everything. You would go mad. But if anybody is seriously interested in this, and I hope you are, if you come to me afterwards, I will show you the research that I've been drawing on, and you can research it yourself. So this is the tip of the iceberg. I'm only going to give you the tip of the iceberg, because in my notes I've only got the tip. But for instance, at 3 areas, so what I'm looking at is marriage as against the other forms that are popular in our society, that is cohabitation, lone parent families, blended families, step families, and families that have suffered divorce. Setting all those against children raised within marriages, what do we see? 3 areas: children, the partners themselves, society. I'm going to have to whiz through this really quickly, but children, for instance, education. These are a number of areas where you can see huge advantages. Education, health, crime levels, abuse, most critically. Education, I mean, just at random, you're twice as likely to graduate if you're brought up with a married upbringing. If you're not, you're 3 times more likely to drop out, twice as likely to be unemployed, to have low income and need income support. Health, now here's an interesting one, 3 times more likely to die of cot death if your parents are cohabiting, not married, 7 times more likely to die of cot death if you have a single mother. Crime, boys brought up without their fathers are more than twice as likely to end up in court, more than twice as likely to go to prison. Critically, abuse, this is the one we really should take seriously. Now, just to put this in context, to give you a little bit of understanding, girls brought up with a non-biological male mature sexually several years earlier on average. Now, that's not that surprising when you think about it. Their bodies know that they're living with a male they can breed with. His body knows that too. So it's perhaps not surprising that that children are 5 times more likely to be abused. This is one study, 5 times more likely to be abused in lone parent families. One US study showed that they're 100 times more likely to be abused in a step family, married or not. Marriage actually
and you have one more minute.
Sorry?
You have 1 more minute.
Okay, thank you. Here's another really scary one. 70 times more likely to suffer fatal abuse brought up outside of a marriage. I can't give you all of these. Same for spouses. You will earn more, again, allowing for background and profession, live longer, in countries all over the world, Bangladesh, Taiwan, better mental health, lower crime, lower testosterone. Society, The cost of marriage breakdown is phenomenal. 44 billion a year we spend on this country. And did you know, for every £1 we spend helping people stay together, we spend £5,800 on the breakup of marriage. So huge expense. Okay, so now, one tiny little thing. You may well be thinking, but this doesn't fit with my experience. We spent Saturday night with lovely friends of ours, fabulous girls, 3 girls that they've brought up beautifully. They're not married. Okay, but look at your background. Did you know that the breakdown of marriage affects people at the lower socioeconomic end much more than it does you and me? We're privileged people.
That's time.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I just want to say we have a terrible taboo against this,
but
and we need to be honest about it.
Stay at the podium.
Okay.
Stay at the podium. We might have to turn off a mic.
I have to say, when I was told
it's time for challenges. I can't let you go on.
It wasn't on my research. It was just a trivial
well,
thing.
You like research.
Great, I'll have
you like research. You like research, which is great. Because to challenge you, we have Dr. Stephanie Coontz. Stephanie's up on the monitors now in our Google Hangout. She's co-chair and director of research at public education at the Council of Contemporary Families in the US. She's also the author of The Way We Really Are, Coming to Terms with America's Changing Families. And Stephanie, I think you know your research because Anne certainly likes hers.
Well, a lot of these studies are comparing apples and oranges. And they're not paying attention to the things that create the family forms that people end up in. I certainly don't believe either that anything goes. I'm very strongly against child abuse. I'm very strongly for loving and involved parents. But you know, it's very interesting. If you go back to the collapse of the families of the 1950s and 60s, a funny thing happened on the way to the 21st century. In the United States, domestic violence has been cut by 53%. Sexual victimization reports are down by 70%. Parents are spending more time with their children than the past. Single mothers spend more time interacting with their children than married stay-at-home mothers did in the 1960s. Child abuse is down, infanticide is down, spousal homicides are down, in part because of the availability of divorce. The kind of studies that were just cited here are not controlling for the quality of relationships and for the sort of factors that sometimes lead people into relationships they did not choose. As I understood the debate tonight, it's about what is chosen and entered into, and are those definitely better or worse depending on their form. And I think it's clearly depending on a family's functions. For example, married people are healthier and live longer. That's only if you control all married people, many of whom stay married because they have good relationships, with all unmarried and divorced people. When you actually separate out the unhappily married people, they are less healthy, their immune systems function worse, they're more subject to depression. The same thing is true when we talk about the outcomes for children of divorce. Many, many times, the problems that are attributed to the divorce were actually the problems with a bad marriage, and can be seen 10 to 12 years before the divorce happens. So as a matter of fact, if you want to talk about UK studies, there was a very big, long one yesterday, and you can go to last year. You can go to the Council on Contemporary Families website to find it, and other things like this, that show that when you control for maternal education, problems in the economic sphere, stress of poverty, there are no significant differences in the outcome of kids raised by cohabiting and married parents.
Okay, Stephanie, I'm going to allow Anne some time for you to respond. So essentially what we're talking about here is correlation versus causation. Where's your position on that?
Well, this particular study, How Does Marriage Affect Physical and Psychological Health, which is done by Chris Wilson and Andrew Oswald, as I say, it's a very sophisticated treatment looking at all these different factors. And I mean, they don't say there's causality when there isn't causality. They are extremely careful not to point causality where you can't prove it. But over and over again, these studies are longitudinal. They do show, as I said in what I said earlier, they allow for those different things. I mean, let's take the first point, that violence is going down. Yes, divorces too, actually. So that is a very interesting little sort of correlation there. With life expectancy, it is true that for women, the quality of the relationship makes a big difference as to the effect on the life expectancy. For men, actually, it doesn't. For men, being married and staying married is as important for your health as giving up smoking. Now that, think about how much effort we put in to trying to persuade people to give up smoking. We never talk about this. It is absolutely taboo. We don't say that if you can successfully get married and stay married, you will be as much as healthy as if you give up smoking. I mean, I think that is extraordinary that we never talk about this.
Okay, right. Well, we've had the argument, we've had a response. Stephanie, thank you very much for that. And thank you also. You can take a rest now. And we're now going to introduce our second speaker for the motion tonight, Charlie Condou, who may look very familiar to some of you, certainly here in the London audience. He plays Marcus Stanton in the British soap opera Coronation Street. And now, Charlie, as I understand it, you live with your boyfriend and you have 2 kids.
Yep.
And you have a very interesting scenario. You have your boyfriend and the kids also see their mother as well.
That's right, yeah, we
and
co-parent.
you've blogged about this, the 3 of us. I think that's correct, isn't it?
There was a column in The Guardian, actually.
Now, the same rules apply to you. I'm going to ping the glass at 7 minutes and then again at 8 minutes. Off you go.
No problem. I mean, the problem I think we're going third is that most people have already said what the points I wanted to make. This isn't my excuse for not writing a speech, I hasten to add. But anyway, I may not use all of my 8 minutes, and if I don't, I'm happy to donate them to Anne, who clearly would like some more. The rest of you can go to the loo. Yeah. Okay, a word on stats, I suppose. It's interesting, isn't it? I think we all understand that stats can be used to prove anything, really. We're all quite clever here, and you can find anything that you're looking for on the internet. And I'm not discrediting any of the research that's been done, although obviously I agree with Philippa more. But it's... For me, it's a kind of a side issue, because I think this is a moral question that we're having. The problem with stats is, and facts and figures is it shows where we've come from. It shows this is how it was. This is how things appeared up until now, and this is what it proves. But it doesn't show where we're going, and surely that's what we're talking about. And I know that you were saying that you didn't want to concentrate on the 1950s concept of the nuclear family, but surely that's what the nuclear family is. That's where it comes from. The nuclear family is a 20th century construct, and that 50s model is what we base it on. So it's unfair to say we don't want to look at that, because actually that's important. It's important to see that that's where we've come from. And when the lid was taken off the kind of 50s model, and suddenly divorce rates soared and everything kind of went nuts, does that mean that was wrong? Does that mean that we should have stuck with where we were with that kind of form of family? No, we shouldn't, because the fact is that didn't work. That wasn't working for people. That's why it changed, and that's why society moves forward, because that's what we do. It's not useful it's not helpful to demonize facts, I think. What families need is support, not being told that they're wrong, I think. I can only really come at this from my own point of view. I don't have all the facts and figures anyway, even if I wanted to bore you with them. No. I mean that genuinely. I think that there's so much that the audience could be baffled with today in terms of what we're talking about here. And who knows? Who knows what the truth of it is? I'm sure the studies are there, and I'm sure they're correct. I'm sure there are counter studies as well, and that's the point. I mean, so from my point of view, there isn't any much research into gay families. I'm here, and I'm happy to answer questions about it. From my point of view, really, I think it's, I don't really care what society think of my family. I've been obviously thinking about this subject quite a lot over the last few weeks, and thinking about what it was I was going to say. And actually, I realised that when I was getting my kids ready for school this morning, or giving them their breakfast, or doing colouring, whatever it was, my kids are very small, I realised that I don't really have time to care what society thinks. My job, and all of our jobs really as parents, is to do the best by our children that we can, to be loving, to be supportive, to be responsible parents, and to help kind of nurture our kids and make them happy, content, responsible members of society. I think that's our job, and it doesn't actually matter what kind of a family we come from. I mean, it's interesting that I just want to go back a little bit to what you were saying about the facts and figures of how nuclear families tend to do better, and I'm sure that's true. But I'd also like to look at, if that is the case, why so? Why is that the case? Why, is it possibly because that particular model doesn't face quite the same kind of prejudice that perhaps other families do? Single mothers, come under a huge amount of criticism. It's an unbelievable job that they do, and I don't know how they do it. Single fathers as well, less research done there. But again, it's something that I believe as a society we should be supporting the families that perhaps come from a weaker place. They're the ones that need our help, I think. And that's kind of really all I have to say is that I think, I just look at my notes and check that I haven't missed anything out. I think there was a time when, sorry, just going back to the majority, but again, it relates back into stats, which I didn't want to talk about, but I find that I am quite a lot now. There was a time when the majority believed that women shouldn't have the vote. There was a time when people believed that black people should be slaves. I believe there was a time, we were talking about polygamy before, when a lot of people thought that was kind of the acceptable family model. There are all sorts of different types, and I think we now know that even though the majority believed that at the time, we have moved forward from that point, and we now know these things not to be morally correct, if you like. We have evolved enough to know that, of course, women should have the vote, and of course, black people shouldn't be slaves. But we've come from a time where that was just acceptable then. And I think ultimately that's what I'm saying about every type of family, is that we need to move to a point where all families are accepted and we can just focus on bringing up our children in the best way possible. Well, there you go. That's all I need.
Just, Charlie, if you would, just stay at the podium.
Sorry.
Essentially, I picked up on one thing that really was loud and clear. It doesn't really matter what kind of family we come from, something you said there. But Anne, you reeled off many statistics to show that it might just matter. So it's your chance to challenge what Charlie had to say.
Yeah, you see, what I didn't really have the point I didn't really have time to expand is, I'm sure your family is wonderful, Charlie. From the bottom of my heart. You are from quite a privileged, compared with many people, from a privileged background and a privileged situation. Our eldest took part in a BBC series called Peckham Finishing School for Girls. She's here tonight if you want to quiz her about it, in which 4 middle-class girls were parachuted into Peckham for 10 days. She was cheating because she was brought up in an inner-city vicarage, so there wasn't much that could shock her. But she told me that there wasn't a household there that was an intact, two-parent, legally bound together household. But she also told me, more shockingly, that every girl she spoke to there expected violence in her relationship and experienced it and thought nothing of it. And even it was a form of protection, because if your bloke is bigger than the next bloke, he's only going to slap you about a bit, but you're not going to get beaten up by somebody else's bloke. Now, that's what we have to bear in mind. And of course your family is a wonderful family. Of course, lots of my friends come, gay families, cohabiting families. They are a wonderful example of parenting. But what I find really insidious and sinister about a series of governments that refuses to tackle this because of the taboo about it, I think of somebody like little Victoria Clambier, whose family structure was not interfered with because we mustn't judge other people, and she died. You know, little baby P in a transient family, and he died. Now, you know, another statistic that I didn't bring out is you're 33 times more likely to be abused if your mother is not married to your father. You're even 20 times more likely to be, that's in a sort of transient family, 20 times more likely to be abused if your parents, your two biological parents, are cohabiting but not married. Now, for those children of abuse, those statistics really matter.
Sure.
Right. Okay, well, I mean...
Well, that's fine,
Charlie,
but we're talking about children of abuse. We're not talking about non-traditional families. So
well,
surely that's a
but
different...
we're talking about
just a second, guys.
Puts you at risk.
Yeah, but well, that's interesting then, isn't it? Because actually, surely that's what I was saying before. It's our job as society to protect all families.
Yes.
And so that, you know, I believe in America there are certain tax breaks you get if you are if you're a homeowner, for example.
Right.
It's slightly off the subject, but and people that don't own their own homes don't get the same tax breaks. Well, surely that doesn't make any sense because
of course.
What we need to be doing is helping those people. And I would agree, yes, it was terrible about baby P, but that could have easily happened if his parents...
But not so easily. 33 times less likely to happen. Now,
But
look,
it could have happened.
It could have
so
happened.
we're talking about specific instances, aren't we?
I'm talking about the broad picture. Now, look, I'm asking for honesty.
Let's talk about public policy for a second. Charlie, does your experience... do you feel after your experience that really now, in terms of public policy, we should be thinking about your experience if this is more commonplace in our society today?
The fact is, whatever you think about the statistics of you're more likely to do this or to do that, non-traditional families are here, and they are the majority now. So what do we do about that? Do we outlaw them? Do we say, well, that's not right because for society, they don't do as well as the traditional nuclear family. So we're going to have to change all these other families to make them fit into this because these families do better. That's not possible. No. So we have to look at what we do with these families that are here already. And what we do as a society is we accept them, we embrace them, and we all work together to make a lovely, happy society.
Yeah,
and that's what you were saying at the beginning.
And
that's absolutely what Anne was saying.
I have to stop it there, guys. We're going to need to move to another one of our speakers tonight. That's some fantastic debating going on right there. I wonder whether anyone in the audience or anyone out there on the online, you can sit down now, Charlie. Thank you very much. Take a rest. I wonder whether any of your opinions have swung. We're going to see. We're going to find out. But I now want to introduce our fourth speaker against the motion. Don't worry, Anne, you've got backup. Glenn Stanton is joining us from Colorado, and we spoke to Glenn a little bit earlier. Glenn, let's bring you back in now for your presentation against this motion.
Well, very good. Thank you. And thank you for having me. It's nice to be able to bring representation from the colonies along with Dr. Coontz. This is a fascinating issue, and it's a very important issue because it has to do with the well-being of children, the well-being of families, men, women, and society as a whole. And I want to make a point that I think Anne did very well, and that is the distinction between traditional families and nuclear families. The word traditional is more of a rhetorical word. I mean, if you got 100 people in a room and asked them what they understand by traditional, you'd probably get 100 different answers, if not just, 90 different answers. And we tend to think of traditional as the 1950s family. At least here in the United States, I completely agree with Dr. Coontz in that, the way we never were, it was largely a myth on television. Now, there was family coherence and there were strong families, but not in the sense of, the wife dutifully stays home and vacuums in her pearl necklace and dad dutifully goes off to work and things like that. The previous speaker, really couldn't get it more wrong when he says the nuclear family comes out of the 50s. It just simply doesn't. The nuclear family is not a moral term. It's not a traditional term. It's really an anthropological term. And interesting that even Aristotle talked about it in his Politics, the very first book of that work. He says that every society needs this fundamental pairing of male, female, and their children. And out of that, concentric circles come out of extended families, extended communities. He said, out of communities come the state, out of the state, comes the nation, things like that. The nuclear family, that term is a more distinct, precise, and really, if you will, scientific term. And the anthropologists use it as mother, father, and children. And that is a universal. It is a human universal where, regardless of wherever we go in the world, whatever time frame we go in, we find that those cultures structure themselves for all their other differences around the nuclear unit. Now, there's different divisions of labor, different ways in which they live, different, affiliations and things. But you can always look to a child and say, who's this child's mother and father? And they can point to it. Plato, on the other hand, in these early times, he basically put forth what we're proposing today, and that's the kind of anything goes, that there will not be private families, that, there will be breeders, and it was really a ideal kind of family, if you will, or family setting, and it never has realized its place, any place in any culture, and sustained itself over any time. Now, we need to understand that in the West, largely, over the past 40 years, we have seen great experimentation with the family. That is the decline of the nuclear family, if you will, marriage, raising children within marriage, and we've seen the growth of divorce, cohabitation, single-parent families, fatherless families, sexuality being set free, if you will, from the protective confines of marriage. And we have been able to do exactly as Anne said, lots of very strong, robust, fully academic research on what are the outcomes of this. And what we have found out is that every one of these family forms, other than mother, father, married, raising their own children, biological or adopted children, every one of those other alternative family forms shown in the literature consistently has failed to replicate in terms of human well-being, child well-being, adult well-being, female well-being, society well-being. Each one of them have failed to even come close in terms of outcomes relative to all these other alternative forms. And it's not because they have not been supported. Look at divorce. Divorce is not stigmatized in any way. Cohabitation is not stigmatized in any way. But still, we constantly see that people in those family forms and their own children do not tend to do as well. Now, the previous speaker kind of poo-pooed data. He said, well, you can find anything on the internet, as if, that's what those of us are doing, is looking on the internet for just some disparate facts. No, this is data. And he's basically denounced the scientific method to say, oh, you can get a study to say anything. No, good, solid research is done very carefully. And what Dr. Coontz talks about is, equating and allowing for all these different differences. These scholars are quite sophisticated, and they've qualified for these various things, and the data still comes out. The same is that people do not seem, and neighborhoods and communities do not seem to do as well on a whole host of well-being important measures when they have a high prevalence of married mothers and fathers raising their kids together. Now, this proposition that we're talking about is generally predicated on this idea that love makes a family. And yes, love is a very important component to family, but kids need more than love. Cohabitation, divorce homes, single-parent homes do not do as well, not because those wonderful parents don't love their kids enough. They do love their kids, but it's the form of the family itself that really does make a difference. And we need to know that. We need to understand that. And I would like to address something that the previous speaker just said. He said, there was a time that we did not support the woman's right to vote, or we supported slavery, and therefore there comes a time when we have to support different models of the family. I have to be honest and respectfully so. That is highly offensive and even obscene to put those three things together, as if those of us arguing for the nuclear family are somehow put in lockstep with those who supported slavery or those who think that women shouldn't, be fully accepted in society and get the vote. I mean, that is highly manipulative. It's highly emotional, and it's just unfair and it's untrue. And I would encourage that we not have that kind of rhetoric, because I think it's very problematic. But I want to close with this. What we're talking about in these new types of families is really experimental families. We've never had a society anywhere that has really sustained itself by creating, if you will, kind of freelance families. Creating the kind of family that you want. In all society, there are these norms, there are these values, and we need those for particular reasons. So these are completely experimental families. We don't know what's going to come of them, but we're putting children in the middle and saying, well, if they work out, great. If they don't work out, well, at least we'll know. But kids are falling in the balance. It's interesting nowadays. You pick up a bottle of shampoo or you pick up some product and you'll see no animals were harmed in the creation of this product. But on these experimental families, we can't say that. We're going to have to say, we hope no children are harmed in the creation of these families, but we don't know. And we treat animals with more respect and care and caution than we do our own children.
Right.
And this is an evidence for that.
Right.
And these
Okay.
families are being created and formed simply because adults want them.
Glenn,
So thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you very much for that. Glenn Stanton. Right. Stand by, Glenn. Now, you've talked about evidence and things like this. Stephanie, we're going to take it to you in just a moment on the Hangout. But before that, I want to go to Andrew Solomon. Now, Andrew's a writer on politics, culture, and psychology for the New York Times and also for the New Yorker. He also is the author of Far from the Tree, Parents, Children, and the Search for Identity. As I understand it, Andrew, you're in India right now. Can you just... That's right, isn't it?
I am, yes, I'm in Agra.
And so the interesting thing about India right now is there a lot of people are going to India because there are these clinics for surrogate mothers. So this allows a lot of the non-traditional families to go there and have kids in a way that perhaps the science wouldn't have allowed them to do so before. And that's interesting because we were hearing about, this in terms of anthropological terms from Glenn and about what we might define as a traditional unit. Anyway, that's just food for thought. Just because you're there, I thought I'd mention it. But I'd love to get your response to Glenn there.
So there are a number of points to respond to in what Glenn said. First of all, the idea that we're experimenting with our children. We're constantly experimenting with our children. We've had changes in the educational system. We've had changes in finance. We've had changes in their accessibility of the internet. We live in a society which is in constant flux. And for us to say that we're never going to consider anything other than what has traditionally been done, simply because what has traditionally been done might prove to work better, is an unbelievably narrowing and dangerous point of view to take. I would like to say also, as a gay father, with a complicated web of relationships, my husband is the father of 2 children with lesbian friends in Minneapolis. I am the father also of a daughter with a friend in Texas, and my husband and I have a son who lives with us full time. I would like to say that there is no point going with competitive models of love. There are additive models of love. And in the same way that we require species diversity in order to have a healthy ecosphere, we need to have a diversity of love and a diversity of means of expressing love in order to sustain the ecosphere of kindness. I believe firmly that what has been being argued here is somehow that people who support non-traditional systems of family are in fact supporting the idea of misery, that people who've been through an unhappy divorce, that people who are being abused, that people who are suffering or who are depressed are going to be equally good parents. None of us on this side of the motion are arguing any such position. It's our strongly held belief, I believe, I can speak for the others, it's certainly my strongly held belief that people who are going through psychological trauma for whatever reason, because they've divorced, because they are in unstable relationships, for a whole variety of other reasons, are going to face additional challenges as parents, and their children will face additional challenges, which is exactly why we should allow for structures in which people are able to be loving and kind and engaged and fulfilled without those having to be constrained by the old-fashioned notion of what a nuclear family is. My daughter grows up with a single mother. My son grows up with two fathers. My other children grow up with two mothers, and I feel all of them are beloved, all of them are joyful, all of them are being parented well.
Okay.
And I believe that if we create an open society which allows for those experiments, we will have a society richer in love, with more accomplished, happier, more generous individuals composing it.
Okay, Andrew. Clearly, all you need is love. So, Glenn, we before we go to Stephanie to talk a little bit about the stats that we've and the evidence, obviously I want to get your reaction to that. No competitive love. He's talking about these models, these competitive models. What do you think of that?
Well, we're dusting up the room by talking about, well, love is the center. Love is absolutely the center, but that's like saying flour is the only real ingredient you need to make bread. Yes, it's a fundamental ingredient, it's a necessary ingredient, but you need these other things too. And it's form of family that matters. And I would just like to say, I mean, he's talking about, challenging and supporting angles of love, and what children need is love. And it's almost like storybook kind of talk. It's happy talk, I say that respectfully, and wishful thinking that, if we could just live in a world with love where children just got love, then they would be great. He talked about education. I mean, wouldn't that be true? And that if teachers just loved their kids, then we really wouldn't have to determine or be worried about types of schools. Love is important, but it doesn't fix all problems, and we need more than that. And family form itself, we're seeing in volumes and volumes and volumes of data. There's no research whatsoever that tells us that all kids need is just loving parents. That's wish fulfillment. I mean, we might as well just believe that unicorns exist and things like that. And I mean that quite seriously, because we're just making this stuff up out of whole cloth.
Okay, Glenn, you used the word unicorns and quite seriously in the same sentence. So, I rate you for that. But Stephanie, sorry, the people in my ear are telling me that we can't speak to you just now. We're going to come to you in just a moment. But actually, we have the results of a vote, I think. And the vote sweeps in from the side. Okay, so here's the debate result for before the debate started. Those for the motion, a whopping 59%. For the motion. Those against the motion, 24%, and those who didn't know, 17%. So keep those numbers in mind, because that might change when we get to the end of this. So let's bring in Stephanie. I mean, a lot of our panelists tonight, and people on the Hangout as well, our speakers on the Hangout, have talked a lot about evidence. They've talked about the research and the statistics. I want you to now respond to Glenn on those particular points.
Well, I'd like to make one point on the historical research and then one on the sociological research from temporarily. First of all, Glenn may be surprised to know this, but I totally agree with him that love is not enough. As a matter of fact, if love were enough, if love were necessary for most of human history, kids would have done very poorly indeed, since love was not a primary reason for marriage through most of history, and was not the main way that parents related to their children, who were assets to their labor force. But I need to point out that the mother-father children is far from universal and far from the most successful family form in history. If you actually want the marriage form most preferred in history, it's one man, many women, polygamy, like we were talking about at the beginning. And if you look at the research of Sarah Hardy and other anthropologists, you'll find that kids do best when there are mothers and allo-parents, grandmothers, and people who are not necessarily biologically related who pitch in to raise kids. So that's on the historical research. On the sociological one of the things we're doing is we're confusing two different kinds of families. One are the same-sex ones that are by choice, and I think both speakers on that have made a huge case that I don't need to add to about the advantages of two loving parents of the same sex who cooperate together in raising kids. The other one is the question of how people end up in other family forms, sometimes not by choice. And that's the big chicken and egg problem here, is, when we talk about what's the violence rates in cohabiting families, the problem is that people who are in bad relationships usually don't go on to marry. People who have violence, people who have infidelity, tend not to marry. If we were to make them marry, that would not reduce, I guarantee you, it would not reduce the rates of abuse and domestic violence in those. So the big elephant in the room here is, why do we have these people moving in to unstable relationships that they don't feel ready to marry, and yet they don't feel ready to live alone? And that's the poverty, the increasing, that thing has not been talked about here, the increasing inequality and economic poverty in America and England and throughout most of Europe, that is driving people into relationships they didn't necessarily choose, right, and preventing them from. Those are the bad outcomes. And when we control for those bad, for the things that are causing some of the untraditional families we're seeing that most of the bad outcomes are a result of those prior contexts: the lack of education, the problems of economic inequality and poverty and stress. For example, many women cannot afford to marry or cannot find somebody who could help them develop a very good and effective family form, right, and yet move in with people because they can't afford to live alone. We should be helping those families.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much for that. And some of that just reminds me of a point you made earlier, Charlie, about we have to look to what kids actually need, and that's essentially what this all boils down to. Okay, we're going to really freewheel now in this debate, and we're going to bring questions in from the audience, and in particular from our online audience as well. Catherine Hibbert is our web host. Hi, Catherine. Good to see you.
Hello, hi.
Now, I think that you've been fielding questions from our online audience, and we'd love to hear what it is people have had to say about the debate so far and the questions that they have, and then we'll throw them out there to our panellists.
Sure. Well, there's been a lot of discussion on G+ and on Twitter and on YouTube. I would say, to summarise, that the general feeling is that society has moved on from the nuclear family. It's a thing of the past, and we're moving on. And these days, other forms are just as good. One comment from Daniel Price on G+ is that what children really need, and this echoes a lot of what's being said, what children really need is love, and love is not a sexuality, it's a human behaviour. On the other hand, Mark Salmon on G+, kind of echoing what Anne Atkins was saying, that it's nice to agree with the motion, but the fact is that the costs of a kind of do what I want, libertarian attitude, anything goes, the thing is the cost of that is paid by children. And marriage is a more stable environment to raise a child than cohabitation, and the alternatives, going for the alternatives, is parental selfishness. We've got some comments from Joe Connery on G+, who says that families should provide role models of both sexes. Children need a father figure and a mother figure. It might be nice to have extra people around, but those two things are fundamental needs. We've got a comment that from Dave Hill on G+, that social support for relationship commitment, relationship commitment is a good thing. Social support for it is helpful to raise a child, helping parents to stay together, helping them feel supported. So we should actually legally recognise marriage outside the bounds of a man and woman for the sake of the children in those families. Right,
okay. Catherine, I'm going to have to stop you there. That's really good food for thought and great feedback from our web audience. Thank you, all of you who are out there online right now. Andrew, since you waited a very, very long time to speak, I just wondered about role models. Do you think we need them, really, when we're talking about, in the context of this debate?
I think we need to have a diversity of role models in all kinds of ways. I think there are very few people who are bringing up their children in complete isolation from attachment figures of the other gender. So I think in general, people have male and female role models. I don't think the male and female role models need to be the two parents who have the complete responsibility for those children.
Okay, and great. Stop there. I want to take the same question to Glenn. What do you think, Glenn? Role models
are absolutely important. I mean, none of us are an island. We need other people. But I would absolutely say that moms and dads matter. You know, they're not just sperm or egg donors, they matter in development, and research is very clear on that point. And, you know, you can't do kind of drive-by mothering or drive-by or drop-by fathering. Fathers matter, and we know that when children grow up without the influence of their father, that they face harder, more difficult issues in life, because fathers are different kinds of parents, and we need them. They're not just sentimental.
Okay, Glenn, thanks for that. I'm really glad you said mums matter. I've got 3 little kids. I tell them that all the time. And these are questions that are coming in from our online audience. There was a question, Anne, I see you putting your hand up anyway. You know, earlier we heard from Catherine, you know, we've moved on, essentially. That's what a lot of our online audience were saying. But you're saying a nuclear family is a universal.
Well, I think it was Catherine who said all other forms are just as good. She's not producing any evidence for that. The evidence, I'm sorry to say, is that not all forms of family are as good. Of course, we all know people like Charlie or Andrew who've got alternative families that are as good, you know, but those are individual cases. The overwhelming evidence...
They're as good or not shown in statistics, because they are here and they are here to stay.
Yes, but
so it's our job as a society to support them.
But yeah,
and
I agree,
another
Philippa,
thing, a pure form, like Glenn says, doesn't fix anything. You put a man and a woman together and they get married. It doesn't happen by magic that they become caring, loving and considerate parents. We all need to be reflective. It doesn't happen by magic just because you're in the traditional form. We all need to be reflective. We all need to be considerate. And I agree that you need more than love. I agree that you need to commit to your children and be very thoughtful and prioritise them. But I'm saying that you don't need to be in the traditional model to achieve this.
Okay, hold it there, because there are lots of people in the audience who want to contribute.
Hi, my name is Arwa, and I live in London. This is for everyone at the panel. Are there any statistics of percentage of people who support other forms of marriage, and is that an important factor in deciding this debate?
Okay, well, since you've asked a statistical question, I'm going to take that to our guru of statistics and research, Dr. Stephanie Coontz, who we did promise to speak to earlier on the Hangout. Stephanie, did you hear that question? Does public opinion matter?
Well, I think public opinion matters a lot. I wasn't sure about the exact question. There has been just an extraordinary increase in support for same-sex marriage throughout the Western world, and in a very, very rapid period of time. And I personally think that's not only because of civil rights issues, but because, in fact, heterosexual couples have changed the way that we are doing marriage, and that we are developing marriage in a way that's much less rigid in terms of its roles. Males and females, there's a lot more convergence in terms of what we're doing. And as a result, because we've changed our own way of doing marriage, we're more likely to say, well, maybe you don't need someone who plays the role of a husband and someone who plays the role of a wife, the traditional ones in every marriage. But so to the extent that you're seeing this increase in support for same-sex marriage, I think it's because we are changing our expectations of marriage. Now, I think that it's also very important, a point made earlier, that as we get more support for the validity of something like same-sex marriage, you will find people being able to make those marriages better because they will have the support from the outside. I know when I got married, one of the main things that was important to me and my husband was that we could ask our friends and relatives to take an interest in our relationship. And I think that that's one of the main things that people asking for the legalization of same-sex marriage are asking for.
Okay, Stephanie, thanks for that. I hope that addressed the question for you, Arwa. Thanks for stepping up.
Hi, I'm David, and the question really is a general one. Are we not really fencing around a very central issue? The real question here is, do people have an intrinsic problem with same-sex couples marrying? And that is really the big division between people on this debate. I mean, the truth of the matter is that essentially everybody who parents is engaged in a very, very traditional and really pretty sort of unremarkable activity. It doesn't make a great deal of difference if your relationship is same-sex or is a more quote-unquote traditional two-sex marriage, because what you do with children is the same. You have to look after them, you have to clean them up, you have to teach them, you have to provide them with all sorts of advantages in life.
We'll stop right there.
And these things, I mean, just my final point really is that these issues that you encounter as a parent are very, very traditional. There is no real difference between the way that straight or gay couples deal with those issues. The only difference in the debate is whether people have an intrinsic problem with gay couples marrying. And ironically, that's what gay couples want to do. They want to be more traditional. And that's the irony underneath the motion.
That's a very interesting irony. Charlie, it seems only natural to put this to you. As someone who's written a blog about bringing up kids and, the three of you together, and the trials and tribulations that go with that. I wonder, over a pint sometimes you might discuss with some of your straight friends who have kids, the same things we all talk about when it comes to kids, bedtimes, meal times, whatever it might be. So what's your experience?
And actually that was why I stopped writing the column in the first place, because I realised, I was telling somebody this earlier on, that I found that I was talking about potty training, and that was really boring for me, let alone an audience. Nobody wanted to read that. The fact is, I think you, essentially, as a parent, you keep your sexuality away from your kids. That's what we all do. No child wants to think about their parents as sexual beings anyway, regardless of who you're sleeping with. So for me, that's irrelevant, really. And I think a lot, as society is changing and a lot more same-sex couples are coming to play, and obviously I'm aware that this debate is about something bigger than that, but just to address the question about same-sex couples, is I think that is what a lot of gay people want, is they do want more traditional setups, because the model for them, if you like, is something that they, that's the model for them, a married couple. But ultimately, I think, as Philippa was saying before, it doesn't just magically happen. You don't get married and all of a sudden you become these incredible parents. It doesn't work like that. You have to be child-focused, and that's essentially what I'm trying to get at, is that that's what's important.
And then your sexuality has nothing to do with it, essentially.
I don't see how.
Thank you very much for the question. We have another question over here. Just tell us who you are, where you're from.
Hello, I'm Serena. I'm from London. I'm going to, completely disagree with the last questioner, because this debate actually says it's about anything goes. So I really think we need to consider all forms of family, and it feels like we're spending a lot of time talking about just one alternative form of family. Unlike you, Philippa, I have actually met a chap in a polygamous marriage and had a chat with him about that. And I just wanted to, it really struck me, Charlie, you mentioned slavery and women not having the vote. And then later you said we've moved on from those things since then. And in the same breath as slavery and women not having the vote, you talked about polygamy. So that suggests to me that you see that in the same light as those things. So that's the question that it raised with me, because you did then say we've moved on from that since then, still talking about those things.
I brought that up, actually, because I'd like to address what your man, whose name I've forgotten, said. Is it Glenn? I'm sorry, forgive me, I apologise. Yeah. I was making the point that society changes, and there are certain things that we had a view on years ago that we now no longer believe to be morally true. Women's vote, slavery, those things. Of course, I wasn't likening the opposition, saying, well, if you disagree with other types of family, then you're racist and sexist. Of course I wasn't saying that. That's a ridiculous thing to even infer. I was simply saying that we have come from a time where we had different opinions on things. And there was a time when, as somebody I said historically earlier on, was it Dr. Coontz, I think, said that polygamy was a lot more popular than it is today. That's all I was saying.
Very, very long time. In Europe, since polygamy
regardless, it doesn't matter how long ago it was. I'm talking about how society moves on.
Just because I feel like we haven't talked about other families, apart from gay parents, which I think is still a nuclear family. It's still two people committed to each other, bringing up children. I don't think it's essentially that much different. How do you feel about some of the other families, communes, for instance, which was mentioned on the thing? Do you think they are as good as a nuclear family?
Are you asking
children?
me or?
Well, you, because I happen to be talking to you, but generally I feel like the debate hasn't...
I can give you my opinion, but I don't know...
Well, I tell you what, we'll take that question to Andrew Solomon. Andrew, did you hear the question?
I did hear the question, and I note that Charlie described having a relationship with the birth mother of his children. My husband and I have a relationship with the two mothers of our children. I think you can frequently have a family setting which involves more than two people and which is extremely powerful, extremely effective, extremely intimate, extremely strong. There are usually two people who are primary, but there's also usually a village involved in bringing up a child. And for a child to have a papa and a daddy and a mama and a mommy, that seems to me to be a perfectly reasonable way to go about things. And so while I don't think that all communes automatically work, and I don't support polygamy, I think the narrowing of the idea that it always has to be just two parents seems to me to be a foolish direction to go in.
And the comment that was just made about, these four-way families and the child has access to a dad and another dad and a mom and another mom. The kind gentleman who asked the question previously said it just doesn't matter whether a child is raised with a mom and a dad, but the comment that was just made, it seemed to indicate that yes, moms and dads are good, even if there's two moms and two dads. I would just like to put out the question is, do moms and dads really matter, or are they just simply preferential, or it's nice if you've got one, but you don't need one? And if that's the case, I think that's quite a radical deconstruction of what it means to be human, because our maleness and femaleness is not just how we go to the bathroom or things like that. It goes through and through as to who we are and also how we parent. And there's great research making that point, that moms and dads matter, that they're different. They bring different qualities and essential qualities to the task of parenting.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Glenn. Let's just talk about the issue of identity in families, and definitions and how we view families, our perceptions. They make up so much of our own personal identities. Andrew, I want to bring you back in, and you talked about this really interesting non-traditional setup that you have. But what does that mean for, identity and where your kids fit in, as it were?
I think this is again the question of how much we have to wait to enact or to undertake different ways of being for the society to have endorsed those ways of being. It's a chicken-egg question. So will my children sometimes face challenges in their identity? Yes. But so do children of parents who practice unusual religions, and so do parents of children who are impoverished or who are dealing with all kinds of other challenges. So do children of French parents growing up in England. There are all kinds of situations in which your parents are somewhat unorthodox. I do not think, contrary to what was said before, that love is sufficient to bring up children. I think it's one of many elements that's needed. But I think the other elements that are needed are all things that can be achieved by two people of the same gender, by several people of various genders who are all involved in a child's life. I don't see that there's any convincing evidence, none to me, and I've read also a huge number of statistics and a huge amount on this topic. There's none that convinces me that the only way it's possible to achieve this is in that cliched 1950s nuclear family of a mother, a father, and a kid.
Okay, clearly definitions in this particular argument are very important. Okay, thank you very much for that, Andrew. Now, what we're going to do very quickly is we're just going to get your questions. We won't be able to address all of them, but we are very keen to hear your questions because it's very relevant to the debate. I know there's a gentleman standing at the mic right now. Perhaps you want to tell us what one of your questions might be.
Hello, I'm Alex. I'm from London. You'll have to excuse me. I made a note on my phone just so I didn't forget the...
Go for it.
question.
Access your notes.
I was going to... yes, sorry. I was going to address it at Anne. Now, we've heard from... Oh, sorry, I've forgotten. Charlie, there. It's written in front of him. We've heard from Charlie. We all know people with alternative family forms. You yourself said that you know people with alternative family forms, and that they seem to be working okay. Now, you've said that's because we're all middle class. Are you really saying that all lower class people with alternative families, and what was the next? What was I saying? Yes. No, you specifically said that you weren't looking at gay couples. And that makes me think, well, okay, so what are the types of family you're talking about? Maybe single parents or maybe step parents? And I thought, well, these are the kinds of family forms that they're often not created on purpose. So,
no.
So what do you think, in your opinion, these results of these studies, what does that imply for individual people? Because, as Charlie says, we want to support everyone. And I'm not really interested in government policy. I'm thinking about what does it imply for individuals?
Yeah. Okay. Anne, ideally, I would love to give you a chance to actually respond to that question, but it's more so that we can get an idea of what questions are out there. I'm so sorry, we're running out of time. Thank you very much for that. We also want to get some of the questions that have been floating around on the web. Catherine, just update us on some of the questions that people are asking out there.
Sure. Well, a question from Bien Sir on YouTube is, Sir John Balby said in 1951, if a community values its children, it must cherish their parents. So shouldn't we, she asks, be cherishing and supporting all the parents in raising their children, not demonising any of them? I mean, if we're trying to help the children, they're the ones who need to be central to this. We should give the parents all the help that they need. Wouldn't the panel agree?
Okay.
That's one question. I got plenty more. There's a lot of action out there.
We would love to hear the plenty more, but unfortunately we won't be able to, because we now have to leave some time for our closing speeches from all of our panelists here. Now, all of you are going to have a little bit of time to make these closing speeches. I think you get 2 minutes each. Again, there's going to be pinging of glasses to keep you on time. So let's start with you, Philippa.
Okay. I think what we need to not tolerate, actually, is an intolerance of difference. I think it's not that anything goes, because I don't approve of this intolerance of difference, this thinking that it has to be of a certain form in order to be a family, that you have to have this traditional mummy and daddy married people. Yes, that's a very viable form and a very viable way to bring up children. But if that hasn't happened and we've got a different form of family, it does not help to demonise that form of family. And when we disapprove of, say, cohabiting couples or single mothers, we are actually being harmful. And we are teaching non-tolerance, which doesn't help anything. And I'd also... Now, what else did I also want to say? Yes, we mustn't idealise the traditional family, because it excludes other people. And it doesn't happen by magic, just if you're a traditional family, that you're going to be a great family. So that's really my comment. Let us tolerate difference. Oh, I know what I wanted to say. If we don't tolerate difference, what we get are people feeling ashamed. And the other thing we get if we don't tolerate difference is people then resort to being deceitful, to hiding what their real relationships are. This is the way it was in the bad old days, and let's move on from that. Intolerance of difference leads to deceit, and deceit leads to dysfunction, and let's not have that. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippa. And Anne, before we hear your closing statement, just a reminder of the motion that's being voted on tonight. The traditional nuclear family has had its day. Gay parents, single parents, communes. Anything goes. So, Anne, time for your closing speech.
Okay, just I'll make 3 points very briefly. No, of course I'm not saying that the middle classes are all wonderful and the working classes, no, of course not, of course not, of course not. But you listen to Andrew's setup and it sounds absolutely lovely. Of course it is. But that's not really what we're up against. We're up against a huge... most people have not got a setup like Andrew's. That's a tiny, tiny, tiny little, not even an example of anything. It's a one-off almost. What we're up against is a massive shift in what is happening to marriage, a huge shift. At first, there was lots more divorce than there'd been before. Now there's far more cohabitation than there has been before. And all I am calling for, I'm not calling for stigmatising people, of course not. I'm not talking for penalties from the government. I don't want to go back to the 60s when a teenage girl lost her baby if she got pregnant. That was dreadful. What I am calling for is for the truth. We have had government after government that refuses to face what we know, which is that some forms of family structure, generally, not each individual, of course not, but some forms are safer, are more beneficial for all sorts of outcomes for children than others. And the reason I would like to see truth, okay, here are a couple of reasons why. One is because most people who split up don't actually want to split up. They want to stay together. There is ample evidence to show that if you put a little bit of resources into helping people stay together, it can make a huge difference. For instance, there was a study done in 2010 of 500 couples. This was a randomized study. It was a very reputable study. Randomized couples. Some of them had no marriage preparation. Some of them had only 12 hours, over 12 weeks, of marriage preparation. And after a year, the people who had marriage preparation were a third less. The people who hadn't had the preparation were 3 times more likely to have divorced in that first year. That is a huge difference. So that's one reason why. And here's another reason why. I was discussing with my son before coming here today some of this research. He was asking me about it, and he was very interested in it. And he was interested in the difference, for instance, between cohabitation and marriage. Now, he is in his 20s. He is entitled to know when he's thinking of forming relationships that there is a huge difference. Teenage girls are entitled to know the outcomes if they're likely to get pregnant.
That's your 2 minutes. Thank you. I'm so sorry. They tell me to do this. Charlie, it now falls to you to give your closing arguments.
Yeah. Listen, I just want to kind of echo what I said before, which is I'm not a statistician, I'm not an expert in any of these facts or figures. I could only speak from my own personal viewpoint. But the fact remains that these families are here. And yes, there is all sorts of research, and I'm sure that, looking at, 33% is less likely to be in a violent relationship, whatever the stats were, and that's all valid and completely valid. 33 times, forgive me. But what I'm trying to say is that times are changing, and you say that the gentleman was speaking, this is a one-off, and it's, just a drop in the ocean. Well, it's actually not. Things are changing, and these things are becoming more commonplace. And because of that, more research will be done, and we will see where we go. Yeah. We will see what happens. But it's my belief that actually we will find in the very near future that different types of family do just as well, if not better. And it is our job as a society to protect those people.
Charlie, thank you. And that just leaves Glenn Stanton in Colorado. Your closing arguments, please.
Yeah, real quickly. It's important to point out that we are dealing with, I think, a lot of false assumptions here. It's been mentioned a number of times that the nuclear family, the idea is rooted in the 50s. It's just simply not true. It has a long rootedness in human experience. The other is that, again, it just takes love to raise a family. And we have looked at the last 40 years, lots of different alternative family forms, if you will. And the talk back in the 60s and 70s was, if we can create happy adults and fulfilled adults in the families that they choose, then the kids will do better. And that just simply has not been the case in the last 40 years. And we need to know that, and we need to understand that. But it really comes down to this, that I think, the opposition, if you will, has sort of disproven the measure, because does anything go? No, they've said no, not everything goes. Polygamy is something that we kind of want to eschew, and that they want to eschew. They want to, if you're there and if you exist and if you're a family and you've chosen that family, then we want to embrace you. But they can't embrace particular family forms. And I think many times it's because these are not the kind of family forms that they run into at cocktail parties and things like that. They're not the kind of hip, cool kind of families. But if you're going to open it up to everything, you have got to open it up to everything. And they've got to remain consistent with that.
Absolutely.
Okay, Glenn, thank you very much for that. So, let's give him a moment. So we have the second vote now, the results. And you'll be very interested to hear that the vote has shifted somewhat. So let's just go back and repeat the motion so that we have it again. The traditional nuclear family has had its day. Gay parents, single parents, communes, anything goes. So how did your vote shift this debate? After the debate, those for the motion, now 64%. Those against the motion, 35%. And that leaves just 1% undecided, which for us, that's a delightful result. Thank you, all of you. A reminder of what we had before. Before the debate, it was 59% for the motion, 24% against, and it was 17% that didn't know. So there's quite a big shift of those that didn't know. And the unknows went to the disagrees. So you've done your work, Anne. Glenn, you've done yours as well.
And it was two of us carrying the load, primarily.
Yes, indeed. And very well done as well. Thank you to all of you. It's really quite something for you to step up to the lectern and involve yourself in these debates. It can be quite nerve-wracking, particularly when you know you're going to be challenged on a lot of the points that you've made. So it's just been absolutely delightful having all of you here today. Thank you so much as well to our panelists on Hangout. And our dear friend, the Cardinal in Nigeria. Such a shame we didn't get to talk to him. Though we did get away. Well, that's fantastic. A bit of sunshine from Nigeria. You know, that's fantastic. Brilliant stuff. Okay, well, it leaves for me only to conclude, really, for tonight. It's been fantastic having all of you with us. I have my notes here somewhere. That's something very important I'm supposed to be telling you. Yes. What I need to be telling you is that we will be having another event. The next event is going to be on drones, and we really hope you're going to join us for that one. That is going to be on Wednesday, the 27th of February. But for now, again, just want to thank all of our wonderful speakers, Philippa Perry, Charlie Condou, Anne Atkins, and then our guys on the Hangout, Dr. Stephanie Coontz, thank you very much. Andrew Solomon, give us, well, there's Stephanie. I was about to get Andrew to give us a smile. Thank you for that beautiful smile, Stephanie. Andrew Solomon, live from India. And Glenn Stanton, live from Colorado. We've waved at our Cardinal in Nigeria already. And Catherine, thank you so much. There we go, there's another wave. And Catherine, thank you so much for bringing us the opinions from the web, which was so important for the debate tonight. Thanks again to our audience in London as well. Good night.